I've been arrested 18 times for my art, but I would be in jail permanently if it weren't for my art.
The Associated Press has countersued an artist whose poster of President Barack Obama became one of the most widely distributed images of the 2008 presidential campaign.
I think that making art about world leaders is an extremely important part of an artist's role to make social commentary and make images that actually transform the reference for their own agenda. And the idea that all the artists who maybe made work opposing Bush or supporting Obama would have to clear through a licensing process the images that they used as references, despite the fact that their final product would be transformative both aesthetically and in meaning, really to me would restrict freedom of expression and free speech in a way that I think is very harmful to creative dialogue.
Shepard Fairey's company is also named in the answer and countersuit filed Wednesday in federal court. Fairey and his company sued the AP last month in an attempt to prevent AP from enforcing its copyright in the image.
Once upon a time, all the way back in 2008, there was a pretty contentious presidential election between two guys named Barack Obama and John McCain. Now, most of you are probably too young to remember the nitty-gritty details of this particular presidential race, but that's okay, because I was about 12 when it happened, so politicking around wasn't exactly high on my priority list at the time either. The main things you need to know are what the two nominees' platforms were while running. In a nutshell, McCain played to his experience as a politician, and Obama pushed for change in the establishment. This fundamental difference between the two campaigns ended up playing out quite visibly in the demographics of their voters. Younger voters and progressives mainly ended up voting for Obama, and older voters who wanted to maintain the financial status quo as it was under the Bush administration primarily voted for McCain. Demographic plays a huge part in anything, whether it be elections, marketing, or even which Netflix movies show up in your queue. More than likely, you've gotten one of those surveys on YouTube at some point where it asks you what your age is, which ads have appealed to you in the past, or if you recognize any of the names of the brands it lists out for you. These surveys make your ads more relevant, yeah, but age and ideals play a large factor in the frequency of these random surveys. The answers to these questions dictate the ads you see on news websites, which results pop up first in your search bar, or even which apps are advertised specifically to you based off your age, race, gender, and other general interests that appeal to your specific demographic. Everything presented to you on a screen is determined by your demographic. Enter a guy named Shepard Fairey. Fairey is an American contemporary street artist, a graphic designer, an activist, and a founder of a fairly successful clothing line that relies heavily on influence from the contemporary skateboarding scene in New York. He attended the Rhode Island School of Design and became known for his bold, iconic style that was based on heavy stylization of visual imagery and a general idealization of certain images. He appealed to the young demographic of voters, and he strongly supported Obama, so it really wasn't surprising what happened next. Fairey came into the limelight for the best and worst reasons possible during the 2008 election. Some would argue this fiasco I'm about to talk about here propelled him to fame and renown in the artist community, but others would argue against him, citing thievery and a general disregard for social and artistic etiquette. I'll let you make up your own mind once I explain everything here in a second. The Obama Hope poster was a part of a series Fairey created that supported Barack Obama's 2008 bid for the presidential election. It's a highly stylized stencil portrait of Obama in bold splashes of red, ivory, and shades of blue with the word progress or hope or change printed in bold sans serif letters below it. The stenciled nature of this portrait made it easy to see from a distance, like on the side of a building, for a mural, or from a car window, even if it's stuck on a telephone pole as a loose poster. The colors were patriotic, but adjusted to go well together in a clean, modern color scheme, and the typography at the bottom was short and informative for the public eye, which, in a poster, is something you really, really want, especially since the attention span of most people is like 0.2 seconds, if that. Its composition and balance propelled this poster to instant fame. The New Yorker art critic Peter Shaldahl called the poster the most efficacious American political illustration since Uncle Sam Wants You. However, the Obama campaign wanted little to do with this poster at the time of its release and subsequent success among Obama's voter demographic. It was distributed with very hesitant approval from Obama's administration after a while. But after the election was long over, Fairey actually received a personal letter from the president, thanking him for creating the poster and helping his campaign in such a huge way. In 2009, the original stenciled poster was acquired by the Smithsonian Institution for its National Portrait Gallery. All good things must come to an end, however. In January 2009, after the poster was acquired by the Smithsonian, the photo Fairey based his poster off of was actually revealed to the public. As it turned out, the original photo was shot by former Associated Press freelance photographer Manny Garcia, taken at a 2006 media event with Kansas Senator Sam Brownback. Predictably, the Associated Press threw a legal fit about it. Once they knew they held the copyright for the photo, they were suddenly very aware of all the money they could have made from the sale of Fairey's poster during the election. Fairey paid no fees or licensing for the original image before he made the poster, so the people over at the Associated Press insisted that he was in violation of their copyright. Copyright, in a nutshell, is the exclusive legal right given to an originator or an assignee to print, publish, perform, film, or record literary, artistic, or musical material, and to authorize others to do exactly the same. But let's break this down a bit more. If you snap a photo of your cat, copyright law kicks in the second your finger touches that shutter button. From the moment you have that photo saved to your library, you legally own the copyright to it. It's your creation, and you captured that moment from that specific angle. No one is legally allowed to take that from you unless you grant that person explicit permission to use, reproduce, or market that photo of your cat. By law, you will own the copyright to that photo throughout your natural-born life and 70 years after your death. There's no paperwork, no lawyers, nothing. It's an automatic process. Congratulations. However, work-for-hire photography is different. If a photographer is hired by a business or company for the express purpose of taking photos, copyright is typically relinquished under contract and given to the business the photographer is working for. Manny Garcia took that photo of Obama at that 2006 media event, but since he was being hired by the Associated Press at that time, the Associated Press was technically the one who retained the copyright to that photo. Fairey didn't ask them for permission to use it, so by law, he was technically infringing on the Associated Press's copyright to the Obama photo. Fairey, however, disputed this.
I'm an artist, so I really believe that, anything that stifles one's ability to communicate and express themselves is undesirable, but I do believe in intellectual property. But, when the AP approached me after one whole year of the image being out there, and in every interview I did, I acknowledged that I did a Google search and used a reference from the internet that was an AP photo. They said, okay, we own this image, we want damages, you're gonna have to submit to our will, and obey. And I said, well, I don't think I should have to, but if it'll make you feel better, I'll pay what would have been the original licensing fee for the image. And they said, no, we want damages. And I said, what damages? Your photo's worth way more now than it would have been worth.
Fair use is a subsection of copyright law that allows copyrighted materials to be used without permission, fees, or licensing, provided they are used for limited and, quote, transformative purposes such as commentary, education, criticism, or even parody. This is how YouTube channels such as Cody Ko and Noel Miller.
Husband leaves wife for younger woman.
Hell yeah. Which is just, a common issue for a fearless entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly. Or for budding entrepreneurs watching this, I guess.
If you're thinking of leaving your wife for a younger woman,
Don't do it. Or do it. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, let's see what my man has to say.
Or Drew Gooden and Danny Gonzalez can get away with reviewing things like bad Hallmark movies or other copyrighted materials without getting a strike from YouTube.
Vegas,
Of course.
Dallas, Texas, and Tokyo, Japan. In case you didn't know where Tokyo was, it's in
Yeah,
Japan.
I didn't know where Dallas was.
Usually shop at Bristol Farms, Gelson's, or Whole Foods Market. Wow, you know he's a multi-millionaire
When he
when
shops
at
at
Whole
Whole
Foods.
Billions of dollars in legal fees have been spent by companies and individuals trying to dictate specifically what, quote, transformative means in the court of law. If you quote a song in a video meant for comedy purposes, is that transformative enough? If you write fan fiction for Star Wars, is that copyright infringement? How do lo-fi remixes of famous songs or slowed in reverb songs get the green light through YouTube's algorithm? How could someone like Rit Momney recreate Put Your Records On by Corinne Ray Bailey and actually profit off of it? It all comes down to fair use in that term, transformation. In Put Your Records On, Rit Momney takes an otherwise bubbly and happy song and makes it a melancholy, contemplative song that merely uses the melody and the lyrics of the original to create a whole new meaning.
Three little birds sat on my window.
Three little birds sat on my window.
By warping the original song and changing its intent, it qualifies as fair use, ipso facto, not necessarily a clear breach of copyright. Another example of fair use would be the fact that I just included bits from both songs in this video, a video which is meant to educate, critique, and inform an audience of something completely different. I'm not putting the entirety of both songs in this video, and no one would tune into this video just to hear those songs, so I'm not damaging Rit Momney's music market, but rather using his music to inform an audience about something. Thus, fair use. However, if she wanted to, Corinne Ray Bailey and her record label would be well within their rights to file what's called a DMCA takedown notice against Rit Momney's song. More than likely this isn't going to happen though, because Momney's made Bailey's song that much more popular all of a sudden in the year of our Lord 2020, and I'm pretty sure she isn't complaining about the influx of cash to her bank account. But the fact remains that a DMCA takedown would still be an option at her disposal should she choose to enact it. Remember the term DMCA takedown for a hot second, because we'll come back to that. Now, going back to the 2008 election, Fairey argued his poster was protected under fair use because he transformed the original photo and twisted its purpose to serve a greater, broader cause than what the Associated Press originally intended. He also claimed he had no knowledge of the source of the original photograph when he found it.
So that was a lie.
Fairey ended up filing a federal lawsuit against the Associated Press for their public claims against him, seeking a declaratory judgment that his use of the photograph was protected by fair use and did not infringe their copyright. The Associated Press, predictably, wasn't entirely thrilled by this. They still felt they were in the right to their claim, so the issue proceeded to federal court. Now, Fairey did eventually admit to having known about the Associated Press's claim to the photo after one of his employees discovered documentation citing his prior knowledge of the photo's source. Manny Garcia, the original photographer, also came forward to state that he surprisingly still retained the copyright to the photo, not the Associated Press as they claimed. Per Garcia's contract, he still retained his rights to the photo, and while he was happy with the effect it had had on the world and how it helped Obama's campaign, he still did not, quote, condone people taking things just because they can off the internet, end quote. In the end, the judge presiding over the case urged a settlement, stating the Associated Press's likelihood of winning the case overall due to Fairey's prior knowledge about the source of the photo, and the fact that he tried to destroy evidence that would prove this. Both plaintiffs settled out of court in January 2011, and the Associated Press soon announced a collaboration with Fairey to continue merchandising the Hope image through more legal channels than before. The two parties also agreed to a hefty settlement, but the exact figure of the settlement has remained confidential since then and likely will always remain as such. But Fairey did still get 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and a $30,000 fine for destroying evidence. So, what does any of this mean for you guys? Like, why are you actually watching this video? Coachella, as many of you know, is one of the biggest music festivals in the world. It's a weekend of music, partying, dancing, and friends out in California, and thousands of people attend it every year, except this year because it was canceled, but so was everything else, so whatever. Coachella, while it doesn't own the copyright to the music it showcases at its festival, does own the copyright to all of their marketing and branding materials. The typeface of the name, the poster design, the website coding, everything. They're a big company with lots of resources and the ability and motivation to sue anyone who dares to steal their merchandise and or copy their design aesthetic in any way, shape, or form. In the past, one of my final project choices for my visual communications class was to recreate a Coachella poster using your design tools. The student would research hundreds of artists and groups to be featured, replicate the typeface choices, arrange the poster, and try to get the end result to match a real Coachella poster as closely as possible. But why is this allowed in class? What's preventing you guys, or me, or even the school system, from getting sued by Coachella for replicating their poster? First, it comes down to fair use. Seeing as the purpose of replicating the poster is to educate and inform an audience, and clearly doesn't cut into the festival's market, replicating the poster doesn't do any kind of harm and is transformative enough to fall under fair use's umbrella. However, if you were to post a picture of the finished poster to your Instagram account for whatever reason, that's where things would get a little bit hairy. Now, I'm sure all of you law-abiding citizens out there have read the terms of service of Instagram or any other social media site. You're right? Every time you're prompted with a 57-page spread of 5-point text single-spaced, I'm sure you read every single word of it. What you may not know is that presentation of information is, by all means, fully intentional on the site's part. Every time Instagram updates their terms of service, it's full of legal jargon that a 13-year-old couldn't possibly understand. It's meant for lawyers, and it's primarily intended to bury things that Instagram doesn't want you to see right off the bat. Because who cares, right? You're gonna use Instagram anyway, so what does it matter what they threw in there? Copyright is in there. That's the issue. What you guys may not know about Instagram is that while yes, you do retain the right to any photo you take and upload there, so does Instagram. They can sell, reproduce, transform, or use those photos for advertising should they choose to. Twitter, Facebook, and other content hosting sites also have this language in their terms of service, and while they emphasize your copyright first and foremost, they always add a little bit in there about how they also own the copyright to your photos and can use it essentially for whatever they want. The downside of these sites is the average user's ability to take content that isn't theirs. Shepard Fairey essentially did exactly that with his Obama poster. For the average artist online, posting pictures of artwork and designs is commonplace, and while Twitter also owns the copyright to the images or art that you upload, the benefits of exposure usually far outweigh the detriments. Many famous digital artists and video game concept artists, just to name a few professions, have gotten their starts on Twitter, Tumblr, or Patreon. It's a good place to grow an audience and find your niche, and while Twitter's algorithm isn't exactly forgiving, it gets the job done in a pinch. What's more commonplace in these communities, sadly, is, theft. Many online artists suffer from plagiarism and copyright infringement in some way or another because it's just so gosh darned easy to steal. Even unintentional stealing is a bummer and illegal for us artists to see on our end. Artists lose money, exposure, and intrinsic credit when artists spread around and reposted. Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram are really bad about this, not so much Facebook anymore because nobody cares about Facebook, but I'd say Pinterest is by far the worst about this, and if you guys know anything about me, you know how much I hate Pinterest. It removes links to artists and their work, it doesn't give any money or rights to the artist who originally created the work, it's just so easy to steal from people and put it there. Whenever an artist's work is stolen, however, we do have cards up our sleeves. These cards are called DMCA takedown notices, which I mentioned briefly earlier in regard to the Associated Press versus Fairey case. Let's discuss this for just a second here. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA, was signed into law by President Clinton in October of 1998. Back in the 90s, the internet was just a baby in its first stages of growth, but people were already starting to wonder what the evolution of the World Wide Web would mean for traditional copyright laws. If websites like Google Images could host images without regulation or prejudice, how did that affect the copyright of the image's originator? DMCA was meant to circumvent the power of the internet and give that power back to the originator of the media in question. And honestly, it's worked out relatively well since then. In simple terms, a DMCA takedown is used when an originator of a piece of art, literature, music, or other media makes a claim in good faith that the post is unlawful and violates the originator's copyright. Now, good faith claims in any legal circumstance are usually pretty key. You have to have proper cause to believe that filing the DMCA is rightful before you do it. Otherwise, you're perjuring yourself in the eyes of the law, which we all know is illegal to begin with. It's no different than going to a courtroom and lying on the stand under oath. DMCA takedown notices are common these days, and quite frankly, they're pretty easy to file with any site that hosts content of some kind. The second a DMCA takedown is filed, the offending post is usually struck immediately from its website, no questions asked from the platform itself. A few sites and smaller companies are more willing to look into the issues when they receive them before they strike the posts, but honestly, not a lot do because it's simply not worth the effort. Why? DMCA takedown notices, as I said a minute ago, have to be made in good faith because the person filing the notice is the one taking responsibility for its filing in the first place, not the website that's hosting the content. The person filing the notice will always be held liable for the DMCA takedown, because if websites were held liable for such things, no websites would willingly exist to host content because they'd always be at risk for lawsuits. By placing the liability on the person filing the DMCA notice, it ensures that most DMCA takedowns are in fact rightful, because if they aren't, then the wrongful filer of the DMCA can be taken to court, justifiably. Big companies like YouTube, Amazon, and Twitter often don't look into DMCA notices because, again, they're not the ones that are liable for the lawsuit should one occur. It's much easier for them to simply strike the offending post than worry about anything else. As an example, there are currently a lot of commentary YouTubers who review bad TikToks, viral videos, and other things of the like.
What does this even mean? I don't understand the premise of this TikTok.
The downside of this, as many of you probably know, is that the YouTuber often can't include the copyrighted music from the TikTok and legally put it in their video, so sound is often removed or replaced with royalty-free songs.
Replace the copyrighted background music with text-to-speech, because if her effort is this low, then I'm not wasting mine on finding a song.
This prevents the singer of the song from filing a DMCA takedown, which they would be well within their rights to do.
All right, students, welcome back to How to Buy a Lambo Cash 101. First of all, today we'll be learning about tax evasion.
Some YouTubers have gotten strikes for showing a mere 6 seconds of a famous song, and sometimes even less than that. However, this is where fair use comes back into play and things get muddy. If the TikTok is being commented upon or criticized, wouldn't that fall under the umbrella of fair use? If the TikTok is parodied or transformed, that should, by all accounts, be considered fair use, right? Well, yes and no. Fair use is an elastic phrase with no hard and fast line between right and wrong. It's flexible enough to suit certain situations, but nothing will ever be truly binary about it in a court of law. It depends on the intellectual property in question, the circumstances, the intent of the person using the content, and the basis of the filed DMCA. Some cases are more clear-cut than others. Now, we've been kinda all over the place with this video. We've talked about politics way more than we probably needed to, but whatever. I want you guys to know why I'm teaching this to you. Over the past semester, I've noticed a trend of students, quote, taking inspiration from certain sources and citing it as their own for their projects. Unlicensed reference images, Zentangle patterns pulled off of Pinterest, logo drawings being copied, etc. I've seen a lot of it, and quite frankly, it worries me. A common term for this act is plagiarism, and yes, it can totally get you kicked out of college. But plagiarism is a mere subsection of copyright law. Copyright, fair use, and DMCA are all parts of a larger picture that I think some of you have never quite seen before. When you start your final in class this semester, you really need to take a hard look at which project you choose and where and how you get your inspiration for it. And if the answer is ever Pinterest, you've done something horribly wrong. Doing the Coachella poster in VizCon would be protected by fair use because A, it's for educational purposes, and B, you're not selling the poster or marketing it yourself. In the world of art legality, that makes all the difference. However, choosing to do the Coachella poster yourself rather than having it assigned is where things get into personal choice territory and some copyright issues. When you pick your final, I encourage you to do research into your project. You are not, under any circumstances, allowed to copy someone else's work and call it your own. Yes, I know it's fair use since you're doing doing this for school, blah, blah, blah. But plagiarism is still bad because I also grade you on creativity, so don't forget that. You can take bits and pieces here and there from certain images because it counts as transformation, but outright copying is bad. It's real bad. Super bad, so don't do it. But it seems like bits and pieces of inspiration is where I really start to lose some people. So let's take Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings here. A Song of Ice and Fire is a book series and critically acclaimed fantasy television show written by George R.R. Martin that features epic dragons, and magic powers, guys with swords and stuff, and politics, and magic tree people, just to name a few things. Lord of the Rings is a critically acclaimed movie trilogy written by J.R.R. Tolkien that features dragons, magic powers, guys with swords and stuff, politics, and magic tree people. Lord of the Rings came into publication first, clearly, but do you see the overall issue? If the books are so similar, why wasn't George R.R. Martin sued for copyright infringement by Tolkien's family and foundation? It comes down to transformation yet again. No one owns tropes. No one owns genres. No one owns the idea of a sculpture, or the concept of color theory, or specific types of artistic composition. People can't own those things because without them, the market would be severely limited by the legal system and copyright. George R.R. Martin, whether he's willing to admit it or not, clearly took inspiration from Tolkien's books and other fantasy novels for his own series, but managed to create something entirely unique and different out of it. The same concept applies here in this classroom with your final. Nobody owns the concept of a coil pot or a restaurant menu, so it's legal and fair to replicate these things. It isn't legal and fair, however, to use the same typeface as Texas Roadhouse, with the same menu items as Texas Roadhouse, and the same menu layout as Texas Roadhouse, and also calling it Texas Roadhouse at the top of the menu. Your ideas can be modified versions of the source material, yes, but they cannot be exact copies. I said earlier that plagiarizing an essay can get you kicked out of college, and that is true. It can get you put on academic probation at the least, but when it comes down to violating copyright law by taking media and presenting it as your own, even for educational purposes, which would fall under fair use, without significant transformation, say copying and pasting an essay, the school will not care about you anymore, and I can't emphasize this enough. They will care about not getting sued by the filthy rich corporation that you stole the information from. They will be the ones with money who are capable of suing both you, the individual, and your college, and at the end of the day, your college will sell you down the river for one corn chip just to avoid a huge expensive lawsuit on their part. They already have their money from you, they don't need you anymore. It's why they don't tolerate plagiarism at a college level. It's not because you're lazy, it's not because you didn't do your own work, and I mean, that is part of it, it's kind of a bummer, but ultimately, it's the money factor that they really care about. So don't do it. Just don't plagiarize. Get in the habit now in high school of not plagiarizing, so that you're not tempted to do it when you go to college and you can actually get sued for thousands of dollars. Once we start our final after Thanksgiving, you guys will have to be extra aware of copyright infringement and plagiarism. Straight up stealing from other artists will earn you a failing grade at worst, or you'll have to start over with planning at the very best. If you have questions about it, please reach out to me, as it's always better to ask permission than beg forgiveness in this particular case. And no, that won't count as your single get-out-of-jail-free question. At the end of the day, no one really knows who truly won the lawsuit between Shepard Fairey and the Associated Press. Shepard Fairey said in an interview once that he doesn't understand why he was sued for something when the photo itself at the beginning was worth nothing, until he transformed it into a beautiful icon and poster for an election that was happening. The Associated Press didn't see it that way, of course. They saw dollar signs and they saw lawful justification. There's never really a clear right answer when it comes to fair use, or copyright law, or DMCA. There's only happenstance, opinion, and intent, and those things really matter. Please be cautious when using references or getting ideas from online. Your artist friends will thank you, and honestly, so will I.